Welcome back to the Defying Gravity podcast with Zach Goodman. Today we are going to talk about box squats. We are going to talk about specifically the pads on the box squats, what I like about them, what I don't like about them, and why we do things different than other people. Okay. Um, Firstly, the soft pads versus the hard pads. This is a conversation that comes up a lot when it comes to box squats, something I get asked a lot about. Okay. Let's start about why they're good. Why do these box squats work? Why do they work good with the soft pad? Firstly, it feels better. Okay. If you've ever box squatted before with soft pad, it feels pretty good. Box squats with soft pads feel better. Okay. They're a little more comfortable sitting on a cushion, sitting on some sort of pad. So again, they feel a bit better when you box squat. Okay. Secondly, reference pool of data already. So I have this down as well. So we already have a reference pool of data when it comes to box squat relative strength ratios, right? Specifically, Jared Bidney has some really great stuff out there about consistent ratios when it comes to the box squats in his specific setup, okay, which is something we'll talk about regarding his setup and with his pads, okay? So he has specific box squat ratios that correlate to jumps and 40-yard dash times, okay? So if you can have a kid on his setup squat a certain percentage of their body weight, a certain percentage of that relative strength ratio. If they can squat it at 0.6 meters per second, he can estimate a 40-yard dash time. Okay. And so again, we have a reference pool of data already from Jared. Okay. Thirdly, they may be easy to recover from because there's less collisional force. Okay. So when you sit down on a soft pad, that pad absorbs some of that force. So there's going to be less collisional force happening. So they might be easy to recover from. This is something I found for myself and for some of my kids that use soft pads. They're easy to recover from. Okay. So my experimentation with them, they seem to be easier to recover from because there's just less collision. When you sit on the box, there's that soft pad that's absorbing some of that force that's coming down. So it, again, is absorbing some of those things. And then lastly, proven success with athletes. Okay. This is another thing that, again, we've used soft pads across, again, the last, I don't know, a few decades now. We talk about history in just a second. Soft pads have been being used on box squats forever. Okay. Power lifters, athletes, okay. Anything you can think of, people have been using soft pads for box squats for a long time now. So we know that from a longevity standpoint, they work. Okay. The box squats work with the soft pads. We've seen it time and time again. Okay. So that is why they're good. Okay. Those are some good things. Again, lots of people use them. I'm probably one of the few people that don't use the soft pads. Okay. So let's talk about the history on the pads. Okay. Firstly, Westside Barbell used them for raw training. Okay. So when it comes to the boxes, okay, Westside squats to a box with foam or some sort of pad. Okay. You can see that in all the videos over the last few decades. Again, they squat with the pads. Okay. Why would they squat with pads versus squat to a hard box? Well, it mimics the artificial elastic properties of the suits. Okay. So Westside Barbell, they are a club that trains athletes, but they also train powerlifters. That's pretty much a lot of what they're known for, at least across like mainstream media. Okay. They're known for having a bunch of really strong powerlifters and strong athletes. Okay. The reason that they started squatting to those foam pads, in my opinion, is that it seems to carry over better to squatting in some sort of gear. Okay, because it has an artificial elastic property because you sink into it. Okay, I learned this for myself from squatting in gear. Okay, so when I would raw squat, there's not that elastic energy per se that you're sitting into, right? But when you are using a squat suit, because those squat suits are bounded up, when you sit down into them, there's an elastic energy that allows you to pop out of the bottom. That's why you can squat with the squat suit, right? It's an artificial elastic energy happening in the bottom of that suit. When you squat to the pads, it's the exact same thing. There's artificial elastic energy from that pad from when you sink into it, right? That foam wants to go back to normal, wants to go back to homeostasis. That pad is creating artificial elastic energy, okay? But this didn't help my raw squat. Okay. What I learned from this is it did not help my raw squat, but it taught me the coordination, the skill of using elastic energy within my briefs. Okay. So when I started speed squatting with it, it clicked. Okay. So when you squat raw, they squatted into the pads because it almost mimics their ability to squat in their suits. Okay. So that was almost like a learning technique. It's something that nobody talks about, but again, it clicked for me when I started doing. I'm like, oh, wait, that's why they're using the pads. It allows you to train raw so the absolute loads are lower, but it allows you to learn that skill of using that elastic energy, that bounded up energy out of the bottom without having to put the gear on. Okay. So that's what it ended up doing. It allowed people to learn how to do that. Okay. Which is great. Okay. Other history on pads. Okay. Jared Binney. So we have Westside Barbell. They came onto the scene. They were using box squats for the powerlifters. They're breaking a bunch of world records. Again, over time, they shifted more athletes. But again, powerlifters is a lot of what people know them for. Jared Binney comes on the scene. Okay. Jared comes on the scene and he's using them for athletes. Okay. So he's using these box squats with these soft pads on. He has the Elite FTS pads. I think he's shifted from, he doesn't like the black ones. He likes the blue ones. It's a certain, I think it's maybe 6 inches of depth, 6 inches of depth, to a 12-inch hard box. Okay. So he comes on, he creates these very specific ratios that transfer over to jumps in this 40-yard dash sprints. Okay. And they're really consistent with his setup. Okay. So he, in his gym, with his kids, with his exact setup, is able to pretty much leverage these box squats with the pads in order to improve 40-yard dash times. Okay. No debate on that. Okay. And he's had tons of success with jump records. His kids jump out of the building. He has very successful athletes. Fantastic. Okay. Other guy comes to mind, Bird. Okay. Brandon Bird at Bird Sports Performance. He also uses these soft pads for his athletes. Okay. And he's had a long, successful career with working with track people specifically. Okay, he has had some studs. He's worked with some NFL football players, Pro Bowlers, things like that. But again, track is something that a lot of people know Bird for. He's had a ton of success with using those, and he has good jumpers too. Okay, as you start to learn, people that jump high also run fast. Next, other person, Michael Fahey, Tallahassee. Okay, he uses the box squats with the pads. He doesn't use the specific Elite FTS foam pads that Bird or Jared used, but he has his own kind of pad setup. But again, he's squatting 2 soft pads. Okay. So history-wise in the pads, West Side, and then you have these lineage of coaches that are using specifically for athletes. Okay. So there's just kind of history going on here as far as using the foam pads. Okay. So you have all the success. You have all these great coaches. You have all these fantastic, explosive athletes, super strong world records, okay, being broke. Why do I not use them? Why do I not like them? Okay, what do I not like about the soft pads? Okay, and there's some things that I wanted to share. I have these in my notes that I want to share with you guys. Okay. Firstly, tissue deformation is lessened. So when you are squatting into a soft pad, you are actually lessening your own tissue deformation, right? So when I sit down on a hard surface, okay, specifically my glutes are having tissue deformation happen, right? My glutes are smushing into that box per se. Okay. And so this is creating tissue deformation, which is increasing the elastic properties of my tissue because the body wants to go back to homeostasis, just like that foam pad does, right? Okay. So when it comes to squatting down into that box, you're having less tissue deformation because the box is giving you the artificial deformation from the foam pad. Okay. Whereas you're not getting that deformation if you're using that foam pad, but if you're squatting without a pad, you're getting tissue deformation from the glutes. Okay. Glutes, hamstrings, every other muscle is sitting under the box, right? Okay. Tissue deformation is extremely important when you're trying to develop not only force and elastic properties, right? When you're also trying to develop tissue health. Okay. So if you want athletes that are stronger, okay, that can absorb more force in the tissue, you also want more elastic properties out of the bottom of the squat. You do not want to have artificial elastic properties happening. You want to be able to teach the tissue to deform and then get back to reform as fast as possible. Okay. And so when you sink into this foam, it's artificial elastic energy, right? The foam is giving you elastic energy. It's not your own tissue giving you elastic energy. Okay. That's the first thing I don't like. Okay. I'm not a fan of that. Secondly, they're unstable. Okay. When you are squatting into a foam pad, you are sitting on a more unstable surface. Okay. It's the same reason we don't sprint in sand. It's the same reason we don't jump in sand. We don't jump off pads. Same reason that you don't bench on a BOSU ball. You don't want to bench on a bench pad that you sink into, right? Because unstable. Okay. What does instability create? It creates less motor unit recruitment. Okay. Again, we've talked about already on the podcast, we are chasing motor unit recruitment. That's the only reason that we lift weights. So we sprint, so we jump. We are manipulating the nervous system to create and recruit more motor units so that we can train and fatigue them. Okay. So this is how we develop more. This is how you teach your body to recruit more over time. Okay. The reason that these foam pads, another reason I don't like them, is that they are creating an unstable surface, meaning that you are actually going to have less force output and less motor unit recruitment because you are sitting into a pad. Okay. That's not what we want. We want athletes to recruit the most amount of motor units possible so they can produce the most amount of force in the fastest and quickest rate. Okay. By training in a more unstable environment, we are actually lessening motor unit recruitment. Okay. So that's a huge one. We have to be able to recruit as many fibers as possible, as many motor units as possible. Okay. In a synergistically kind of fashion. Okay. And so by squatting into something unstable, we are actually going to lessen that effect. Okay. And so this is the same thing, same kind of logic that we came to conclusions of through studies with sand, running in sand. Okay. You can't produce the same amount of force because it's unstable, and so you're recruiting less motor units. Okay. So this is huge. We do not want to do this. Okay. Next. Okay. Again, due to the instability, it takes away from the very reason that box squats are great. Okay. Box squats allow more stability because athletes don't have to worry about stabilizing the weight when they sit down in that bottom position. Okay. Because they are sitting down on that box is giving them more stability. Why do you think that we see greater peak powers and greater rate of force development from box squats in studies? Okay. And just in general, if you practice with the box squat, you see it. Okay. Why is that? Because we can recruit more motor units in action. Okay. Because it's more stable than a free squat. It's more stable than a front squat. Okay. Because it's more stable. Why do people bench press more in a Smith machine? Because it's more stable. Okay. Box squats offer stability. It's the very reason they are so effective in building really, really strong and explosive athletes. So they're so stable. They allow us to train and recruit more motor units. Okay. And so because you don't have to manually slow the bar down, there's not that coordination effect on the bottom. The box does it for you. You can slow that box is creating collision, which is stopping that bar and stopping you. Okay, which is a very reason it's very it's the reason the box squats are so successful. It's the reason why we love them so much. It creates a better training environment, right? We're getting a greater training effect for those jumps and those sprints and things like that. Okay. Next, static over dynamic is hampered. Okay, because of the sink, because the bar is never coming to a complete stop because you are sinking in foam. You are sinking in an unstable environment. When you sprint in sand, it's the same thing, right? You're never coming to a complete stop because that sand is moving, is that sand is deforming, right? Same thing with the box pad. When you sit down on a box, that pad is deforming. Okay. And so this is actually hampering that reactive contrast method that we all chase, the static overcome by dynamic method. Okay, it's actually hampering that method because the bar is not coming to a complete stop. When you sit on a box that is creating that collision, that is overcoming the inertia of the bar and is coming to a complete stop. Okay, when you squat in those foam pads, there's no complete stop. So you're not getting a true static overcome by dynamic reactive contrast method. Okay, you're not actually getting that because you are squatting in a pad. Again, I squat in pads in my own training. It's something I found is that I can truly never have that bar come to a true complete stop because those foam pads are still moving. They're still moving out of the bottom. Okay. And so the body knows pressure gradients, it knows velocity. Okay. And so it knows that it's slowing down. Okay. So you're still getting you're still getting that effect, the static overcoming dynamic effect, but it's hampered at the same time because you're not coming to a complete stop. Okay. It's the same thing with the bench press. If you're going to pause bench, right, that bar comes down because the pause bench is a static overcoming dynamic exercise for the bench. Okay. That bar comes down and it pauses, right? You're using your own body to create that collision to slow the bar down to a complete stop. Okay. That bar has to come to a complete stop. If you've ever benched with a foam pad where you've had some sort of foam like block or something like that, you'll know that you get elastic energy out of the bottom to kind of slingshot that up. Okay. That's not what we want. If we are trying to teach the body to go from a static start and recruit and accelerate as fast as possible, we need to train the body to do that because when you are sprinting, when you're lining up in a 40-yard start, there is no elastic energy. There's no artificial elastic energy happening, right? It is coming from your body. Your nervous system has to create that. Okay. And so for me, I would rather just teach if we're using the box squat to try to transfer to 40s and jumps, this is what we want. We want the body to have to create it on its own. We don't want any help. Okay. Also what I found, another thing other thing is that the softbox doesn't transfer over to deadlift. Okay. The deadlift is a static overcome by dynamic exercise because the bar is stopped on the floor. You pick it up from the floor. It is a static overcome dynamic, right? The bar is completely in a static state, zero velocity. It is just sitting there. Okay. It is glued to the floor. You have to create dynamic energy and dynamic force to pick that bar up. Okay. And so there's no artificial energy with that either, right? Again, you can think about things like pulling whip, pulling slack out of a bar, but again, you have to create that. There's no artificial energy happening. There's no artificial elastic property that's happening there. Okay. And so that's why we don't see the soft pads carry over the deadlifts as much. Okay. The deadlift from what I've seen, okay, the hard box actually carries over to the deadlift a lot more than the soft box. Okay. And it makes a lot of sense because you're actually getting a true static overcome dynamic method. Okay. And so those are some things I don't like about the pad. Okay. So here's what we do instead. Here's what, again, we have a solution, right? I'm never going to offer something and then not have some sort of solution or give you guys something to take away from this. Okay. We squat to hard boxes. Okay. Hard boxes, again, create consistent and predictable numbers, right? Because we are just taking one more variable out of that box, right? Because every athlete that sits down is sitting down on a stable surface. So there is one more variable that we can take out, right? We don't have to worry about some athletes rebounding out of it, some athletes sinking in more because the weights are different. You don't have to worry about any of that, right? Because you were all squatting in the same box. And we are looking at predictable and consistent results. That is what we want. Okay. Secondly, squat ratios need to be higher to elicit the same speeds. Okay. It's not because the pad is better. The reason your squat ratios have to be higher is not because the pad is better, it's because the pad is robbing output. Okay. So I move athletes to soft pads. I move myself to soft pads for periods of time. Okay. What I found is that when they move to the soft pads, the numbers line up with Jared's, right? Because that's the constraints Jared has in his athletes, right? Okay. When I move them off the soft pads, strength ratios rise. Okay. It's not because the pads are better, it's because the pads are taking away from that motor unit recruitment, taking away from that, ultimately taking away from that force output. Okay. So I think coordination demands are going to be developed better due to absolute loads. Okay. So if my athletes can have more absolute load in their back, more absolute load in their spine, okay, their nervous system has to overcome greater absolute loads, I think that's going to carry over better. Okay. From a coordination standpoint, you need extreme load to have extreme changes in the nervous system. You have to have extreme forces, right? You have to have extreme pressure. Again, if my athletes can handle absolute loads better, again, coordination is going to be better. Same with squatting in a multiply suit, right? If your athletes squat, or if you have powerlifter squats in a multiply suit, you're still going to be really strong raw because their nervous system is still squatting 1,000 pounds. Regardless of what the suit is doing, their nervous system knows that it has 1,000 pounds of pressure on its back, right? It doesn't really realize the pounds, but it realizes forces, okay? And so there's greater coordination and neurological gains doing that, okay? Same reason that you would use like a slingshot or some sort of thing like that, because you're overloading. You're getting greater coordination happening because of it, okay? And so again, more load, faster coordination development. Okay, it's the same reason the isometrics work. It's the same exact reason. Okay, because there is more load, there's faster coordination, there's more force being applied. Okay, same reason the isometrics can be effective. Other thing, okay, if you squat to a hard box, you're gonna have to do more hyper work. Okay, you're gonna have to use the reverse hyper more. You're gonna have to do more traction-based training. Why? Why do you need to have more traction-based training if you squat to a hard box? Well, collision. Okay, we've already talked about it. Collision is going to happen at a greater extent when it comes to squatting to a hard box, right? Because there's no soft kind of sitting. Okay, so there's more collision happening on the spine. That is true. Okay, that is not a bad thing though, because the reason we train is to train the body to absorb and produce force. Okay, so when the body is being trained to absorb greater force in collision, you are going to be able to produce more force in collision. You're also going to be able to absorb more force in the collision. Okay. This is not a bad thing. This is people stay away from box squats because they're afraid of collision. You want stress on the body. That is the only reason we lift is to stress the body. It's the only reason we do it. Okay. So you absolutely want stress on the body. Okay. How do we overcome recovery demands? We use the hyper, we use traction-based methods. Okay. This is kind of how you overcome that soft pad type thing. Okay. Okay. So few things. Okay. Kind of to hopefully conclude this whole thing. Okay. Ask yourself, what's the true driver of the result, right? We see all these great box squats coming out of different gyms, right? A ton of people use the foam pads, but not everybody has the same results with athletes, right? Okay. We see some really, really legit elite coaches, the Birds of the world, the Fahey's, the Bidneys, okay? Their athletes, while they squat in foam, there's a ton of coaches that squat in foam. Why are their athletes not as strong as their athletes? Why do they not jump as high as their athletes? It's because the foam pad doesn't matter. That's not the main driver of the result. It's not. It's not the main mechanism that's driving the result. Okay. In my opinion, the main driver is going to be the intent of that box, right? Their athletes squat and train with greater intent. They're able to communicate with them the intent that is necessary. Have you guys ever seen Jared's kids squat? They squat differently than everybody else. Okay. They squat with more aggression than everybody else's kids do because Jared's been able to communicate and teach them the intensity that they squat with. Okay. That intention of the squat. Okay. The main reason that his kids jump so high is not because of the foam pads or they run fast, because it's not because of the foam pads. Okay. It's the way they train. They move different. They train different. Okay. So that's one message I wanted to leave you guys with. Second one, don't be afraid to be different. Okay. I'm different than everybody else. Okay. The things that I do is different. Okay. Same philosophies, similar things that we do, same thought process, but I'm different. I do different things with my athletes, right? There's not a single, again, I talk to all these coaches. I have really, really close relationships with a lot of coaches I mentioned on here. Okay. I work differently than they do. I train differently than they do. Okay. They have their things they do. We have things in common, but again, I have things that I do differently. Don't be afraid to be different. You don't want to try to replicate someone else's success. Okay. Because you're never going to be able to replicate them and be them, but you can create your own success and create your own system, kind of your own recipe, right? I can give you the same ingredients, but you're going to come up with something that tastes different. Okay. Same thing as everybody else. You can try to take these ingredients, people can try to take their training programs, take their different practices. Okay. But you're never going to cook like them. Ultimately, you'll never cook like them. You got to cook your own thing. You got to figure out your own recipe. You got to mix it. You got to mess with the spices, mess with those types of things to cook a great product. Okay. And so ultimately, you can steal things from them, but don't try to replicate them. Okay. That's the main thing. That's something that I've talked about for a long time. Okay. It's a disservice to the people that came before you to try to copy and replicate them. I'm not trying to copy or replicate anybody. Okay. I'm trying to do exactly what I think is going to lead my athletes to great success. Okay. I've stolen a ton of things from all these different coaches, right? But I'm not trying to be them, right? It's a disservice to them to try to be just like them, right? Same thing with Louis, right? We see these different coaches that have kind of veered, coaches I've mentioned here that have kind of veered away from just the West Side conjugates, and they've changed some things, they've tweaked some things, right? Okay. They weren't afraid to be different. Okay. It would be a disservice to Louis if you didn't try to be different, right? Because Louis was trying to constantly change. Again, I think I tweeted today. I shared something today from Westside Louis and how they talked about moving to fives and moving towards brief maximal tension based training in the dynamic effort versus previous like doubles and triples and things like that. Okay. Louis was constantly changing. He was constantly trying to change things and do things different. Okay. That was one of the reasons he was so successful. That's the reason Westside was so successful. They were never emotionally attached to one specific mean, one specific practice. Okay. That is going to be one of the worst things that you can do, is to become emotionally attached to certain things, right? Again, the soft pads are fantastic. Tons of coaches have had tons of success with them. I've had more success doing it the way that I do it. Same thing with my brief maximal tension waving. Things that I do is different than the things that other coaches do. The way that I run it is different than the way Jared runs it. It's the way, the way that I train is different than the way Bird trains. It's different than the way Fahey trains. The way that everybody's stuff is different, right? The way I do stuff is different than Nate Harvey. Okay. Everybody's stuff is different, but you have to find what makes sense logistically for you, but also what can you manage and what can you cook, right? Because I have different skill sets than other people have, and so do you. Okay. So take the recipe, tweak it, and cook it the way you cook it. Okay. That's my ending message, is to be different. Okay. Do things the way that you in your gut know to be true, right? Inherently, I knew that this would be some things that I had to change the box squat. Okay. It would be very easy for me just to take things face value and do it the way everybody else does it. But if you want a different result, you're going to have to try different means. It doesn't mean that you don't change. Okay. It doesn't mean that you're not loyal to previous philosophies and things like that. Okay. But ultimately, you have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to look at things from a different lens. Okay. It would be very easy for me to run the same type of soft pad back squats as everybody else. Okay. But I'm cooking stuff the way I cook it because I've seen it work better for my situation. Okay. And hopefully you can take something away from that today. Okay. Thank you guys so much. The support has been awesome. Okay. Hopefully you found some value in this episode. If you have questions, shoot them to me. Okay. I'm trying to get some sort of podcast out every week or every couple weeks. Okay. So if there's things that I can add or do better, please let me know. Thank you.